I think I've gotten ideas about what to do research on or to write or think about from things that I found interesting in my own life and just following the paths of life. Because for me, being passionate about something is the number one way to be a good writer or speaker, in my opinion. And very often people sometimes try and decide what they want to do because they think it's the cool thing to do, but that doesn't always lead to the most interesting writing. So, my original research is in Indonesia, and I've been going there for 20 years because I went there for the first time and got very interested in it and its people and became an anthropologist. And then about 10 years ago, I got interested in virtual worlds and sort of started checking it out. And to me, it's really that garden path of life. Instead of having a clear plan ahead of time, it's more about being flexible and following one's passion. Well, my research that's more relevant to the topic of digital culture is about virtual worlds, which are places online where people interact that nowadays are usually three-dimensional. Most of them are online games. They can be things like Minecraft or World of Warcraft or whatever. And I got interested in it because I was always sort of a geek or was interested in technology and video games ever since I was a kid. And I had been doing this research in Indonesia for many years, and I thought I wanted to try something new and stretch myself. And I'd heard about these virtual worlds that were starting to come into being in the early 2000s that were more complicated than the things that had come before them, and started playing around with them, and then got the idea, what if I tried to study these like it was a foreign culture as an anthropologist, like I was going to Indonesia? What if I went to Second Life, which is one of these virtual worlds, and tried to study it like an anthropologist? Would that work? Would it fail? Would it succeed? And so that really was what got me started in doing that kind of research. And then it really worked, and so it's worked very well. And for me, it's become an interesting way to try and think about how is it that different kinds of online social interactions are changing what we can do as human beings and making things new things possible. But also, in what ways are these new online spaces revealing things about the human condition that have been there all along? That not everything is new under the sun. And many of the things that happen online are very similar to things that have been happening for hundreds and thousands of years. And the people who try and sell us these technologies often don't want to let on about that because they're interested in things being new and shiny, so you want to buy them. But for me in my own research, the most interesting things for me were the things that weren't new, were the things where people would be interacting, forming relationships, socializing, and doing things that actually weren't necessarily all that different from what they were doing before, but were revealing something about how human life has been digital for as long as we've had 5 fingers, and not all of it is new. So when I started doing my research on Second Life, it was very new. It was just a year old. And so I thought at first, there won't be anything relevant that I could use, other research that other people have done, other things that people have written. But of course, I was wrong, and that's what was really fun. Part of what I found was that there were a few people who had already been doing a little bit of research in Second Life and writing about it. But then there are other virtual worlds or online games, and some of the earlier ones from the 1990s were all based on text. Like there was one called Lambda Moo, which MOO stands for a kind of multi-user domain. It's a kind of early virtual world. And when I started reading some of that earlier research, some of it was written by people who were actually helping to design these things, like Pavel Curtis, who was a researcher at Xerox. But my jaw dropped because they were talking about the exact same stuff I was seeing in Second Life, like people having multiple identities or people pretending to be away from the computer instead of replying to a question that was making them uncomfortable. Even little things like that, or how people were dealing with conflict and resolving conflicts. So much of it was very similar to what I was seeing, even though I was talking about a very beautiful three-dimensional virtual environment, and they were talking about something that was all text. And it was really valuable for me to have that historical perspective. But then even going beyond that, science fiction has played a big role in the creation of online communities. It actually has shaped the actual way they are coded and designed. And so reading things like Lord of the Rings or earlier science fiction, Neuromancer, actually was really helpful as well. So I found it helpful to look at other researchers, but even to move beyond research in the narrow sense, to look at fiction writers and to look at history, that there were people getting married online on the telegraph in the late 19th century. And many of the things that were going on with the telegraph were very similar to what was happening in virtual worlds. And paying attention to that kind of research and not giving up, really looking hard to find relevant research, I think is important for anything that we do. But it's especially important for research about anything related to technology, and especially digital technology, whether that be virtual worlds, whether it be Twitter or mobile phones or the Internet of Things or anything. And the reason why is when we study anything about the internet, anything that's digital, some of it is new and some of it isn't. Some of it really is new. I don't believe that nothing is new under the sun. Some of it is new and some of it's not new. But it is incredibly hard in the moment that we're looking at it sometimes to tell which pieces of it are new and which aren't. It really tricks us. People will think that something is new and it turns out it's been around for 30 or 40 years. Or people will think that something has been around for a long time when it actually is an innovation that really is unprecedented. It's remarkably difficult to tell in the moment that you're looking at it which things about something digital are new and which aren't. And looking at that prior research is the best way to get a handle on what pieces of it are new and which aren't. So it's an incredibly important part of any good research, for sure. So the issue of multiple identities is a really interesting one for a lot of different online spaces. And as a researcher, certain particular issues can come up. So all of us in our everyday life often have different identities in the sense that, I'm a professor, and then at home I'm, going to the grocery store. I'm not a professor in that moment, but I still have the same name. We still typically have the same identity, but with online forms of social interaction, we do get the possibility for having all kinds of multiple identities. And those multiple identities and everything that goes on online is real. Like in everything I write, I'm always very careful to talk about the digital and the physical, not the digital and the real. Because if you learn German online, you can go to Germany and speak German. If you gamble online and lose money, that money's gone. If you fall in love online, that love is real. That it's all real. And it's also very important, I think, for us to think about that with identity, because when people sometimes talk about digital versus the real world, it's dangerous because you lose sight of the ways that the digital is real, but also people end up assuming that everything physical is real. But there's Halloween, there's play and fantasy and all kinds of things in the physical world that aren't always real as well. Now, in the research that I do in Second Life, I made a decision to always reveal who I am, because ethically, you don't want to ever deceive people when you're doing research. And so I always would say in my Second Life sort of profile, it says who I am, that I'm a professor at UC Irvine. I reveal all of those things. But when I'm talking to people online, they can have multiple identities. And so sometimes I could be interviewing two people. They might be the same person, right? Which raises all kinds of interesting issues. But it also raises very important ethical issues, because what people often forget is that if I have a screen name and I'm Sammy Jones online, I could have a business that's attached to that name. I could have friends that are attached to that name. And as a researcher, I need to protect that name, because to have a pseudonym isn't the same thing as being anonymous, right? If you use Mark Twain as your publishing name, a lot is still attached to that. And sometimes researchers think that because the names are made up, so to speak, they are not deserving of the same ethical protection as a physical world name, but they are. You really have to be careful with that. So for me, the issue of multiple identities and multiplicity is part of what I study. It's really interesting when you can have multiple bodies or multiple accounts online, or 3 or 4 people sharing one body. Neither of those are things you can do in the physical world. And for me, in terms of research or ideas, it's really interesting and exciting. Where you want to be careful, in my opinion, is around ethics and be careful to take care of people, even if they're more than one person. One thing that people have talked about a lot whenever people interact online is what is sometimes called disinhibition, that when you can't see people or see all of the context, all the nuance, all the emotions, people can be mean, people can be impolite, people can say things that get taken the wrong way. And that can really close down access and inclusion, because often when people say negative or mean things like that, they're using slurs or language that puts down a particular group of people. And for me, in terms of the social practices of people online, what I was really amazed by doing my original research online in Second Life, and still to this day, is that there is an incredible amount of kindness online, of altruism and kindness, and people who will take time out of their day to help you with something you don't understand, will provide encouragement and support, will help you out with things. And I think that's not as sexy as the negative stuff. It doesn't get reported as much. It doesn't make the headlines. But I actually think that it overwhelms the negative stuff. I think people wouldn't go online if it was all negative, right? And that there's a lot of kindness and caring and positive stuff that is happening online. And for me, an important strategy is to latch onto that and follow that and participate in that. And don't give the negative stuff oxygen and more attention than it's due, because often that's why people are being negative in the first place, is to get attention. And to really nurture and support the kind things that people are doing online, because there's an amazing amount of that out there. I am every day just struck by how much kindness there is if you just stop and look at it, that people are doing for free with people they never even know sometimes, right? Building new communities, doing really interesting, innovative kinds of things. And it might not seem as newsworthy at the beginning, but learn from that, follow that, support that. And the best thing you can do for the negative stuff is ignore it. That's the worst thing in the minds of the people who do that stuff. The worst thing you can do is to just ignore it, to not give it oxygen and move on and really latch on to the kindness and the good stuff that's going on, because it's there and it's actually not that hard to find. We have entered a world in the last 5 years where, in some ways, for people all around the world, including the United States, the physical world is really experienced now as the temporarily not online. The online world is no longer the home of just nerds and geeks and techies. It's all of our grandmothers and grandfathers and shoppers and aunts and uncles and everyone. And it is the air that we breathe now. Now, for some people more than others, but there's no way that you can get away from it. And so it's really important to think about it and understand it and think about how it can shape your life chances for good or for ill. The fact that we have access to so much information, but the fact that it's so hard to erase, and that something you say on Twitter or Facebook could be saved forever and show up when you're applying for a job, which isn't fair and isn't right, but has happened. And it's a sort of an obvious thing to say, but technology really is neutral in the sense that you can run someone over with a car or drive them to the hospital in the car. And that these technologies, whenever new technologies appear, often people run to either a really utopia narrative, it's going to save the world, or the opposite, that it's going to ruin everything. And either of those extremes is obviously not true. And in your future career and all of our future lives, it's really up to us what we're doing with these technologies. And that also means being aware of the way that they're often owned and controlled by corporations that have their own agendas and their own interests, and can be linked to governments that have their own agendas and their own interests, but are also linked to communities and to people in everyday life. But for good or for ill, and I think it can be for good, the internet is no longer a thing on the side that we turn on and then we turn off and go back to the rest of our life. It is the rest of our life. It is our life. It's really hard to get away from it now unless the power goes out for a really long time or you're really on top of a mountain or something. It's there. It's around us. It's part of everything that we're doing in a way that wasn't true even 10 years ago or 15 years ago in the same way. And I think that can be a very good thing. I really don't want to say that it's a horrible, negative thing, but we have to be careful and we don't want to let other people decide for us how these things are going to be shaping our lives. And so I think that's something that's going to be really important. And it's a moving target because the technologies are going to keep changing, even though some aspects of them stay the same. And so I think staying on top of that is really important. And in terms of research and being someone who does research, and I'm a professor in the University of California, which is a research university system, I think the idea of research is a valuable thing to carry in your heart forever because it's about the idea that we don't know exactly where we're going. It's about the fact that questions are the place to live your whole life. And there's so much pressure, especially if you're going on the job market or starting out, to have the answers, to know what you're going to do, to know what you can do, to know what you're going to find. But in a very powerful way, answers are boring. They close doors. They end conversations. Questions are what create new possibility, new energy, new potential in life. And even in this kind of space where we have, you're ending your time in the UC system and you have to make these kinds of decisions about where you're going to be going forward, stay in that research frame of mind. Stay in that space of possibility and wanting to learn more about the world around you because it is actually a place of power where you can create new possibilities for yourself and for people around you. And to not be afraid of that uncertainty because it can be destabilizing to not know exactly where you're at or where you're going. But it also is sort of the way the world really is, and it gives us a lot of possibilities moving forward.